John always loved rummaging through flea markets, those treasure troves of forgotten relics. He was drawn to the stories whispered by each object, the echoes of lives lived. One chilly Saturday morning, he found himself at a new market on the outskirts of town. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and musty wood. John drifted from stall to stall, his eyes scanning the jumble of antiques and oddities. Then he saw it. Tucked away in a dusty corner, almost hidden beneath a pile of old books, was a typewriter. It wasn't particularly ornate, but it had a solid, timeless quality. Its keys were worn smooth, as if countless stories had been hammered out on them. John felt an inexplicable pull towards it. The stall owner, a gruff man with a weathered face, seemed almost eager to get rid of it. $5, he mumbled, barely looking up from his newspaper. John didn't hesitate. He paid the man, hoisted the typewriter into his arms, and carried it back to his car. It felt heavier than it looked, as if it held more than just metal and ink. As he drove home, his mind buzzed with questions. Who had owned this machine? What stories had been written on it? He couldn't shake off the feeling that this was more than just a lucky find. This typewriter, he sensed, held a secret. Back in his small apartment, John cleared a space on his desk for the typewriter. He ran his fingers over its cold, metallic surface. There was a small, almost unnoticeable inscription on the side. Tempest Scribe. John didn't know what it meant, but it sent a shiver down his spine. He sat down, rolled a sheet of paper into the machine, and placed his fingers on the keys. He had no idea what he was going to write, but he felt compelled to type. He started typing, letting his thoughts flow freely. He wrote about the flea market, the strange pull he felt towards the typewriter, the inscription that sent shivers down his spine. As he typed, the room seemed to grow colder, and a strange static filled the air. He finished his thoughts, pulled the paper out, and stared at the words he had written. But something was wrong. The last line wasn't his. It was a message, typed in a different font, a message that sent a chill down his spine. Flood, May 20th, Town Square, be warned. John stared at the message, his heart pounding in his chest. It was impossible. The typewriter had typed a message on its own, a message from the future. A flood? In the town square? On May 20th? Today was May 15th. He had 5 days. 5 days to figure out what this meant. 5 days to decide what to do. He read the message again and again, each time the reality of it sinking in a little deeper. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him. This was too much. He paced around his apartment, the message clutched in his hand. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe the typewriter was rigged with some kind of mechanism. But deep down, he knew it was real. He could feel it in his bones. This was no joke. This was a warning. He had to do something. He had to warn someone. But who would believe him? Who would believe that his dusty old typewriter could predict the future? John looked at the typewriter, now bathed in the orange glow of the setting sun. It sat there, innocuous, almost mocking him. He was trapped in a nightmare, a waking dream where time was twisted and the future bled into the present. He felt a heavy weight settle on his shoulders, the weight of the future, the weight of the lives that might be lost. He had to act. He had to tell someone. But who? John spent the next few hours trying to calm down, trying to think rationally. He considered calling the police, but he knew how crazy he would sound. Hello, officer. My typewriter told me there's going to be a flood. He imagined the dismissive laughter, the condescending questions. He couldn't risk it. He needed to find someone who might believe him, someone who wouldn't dismiss him as a crackpot. He thought of his friend Sarah, a journalist at the local newspaper. She was always interested in the unusual, the unexplained. Maybe she would listen. He picked up his phone, hesitated, then dialed her number. Sarah answered on the third ring, her voice bright and cheerful. John took a deep breath and told her everything. He described the flea market, the strange inscription, the message that appeared on the typewriter. As he spoke, he could hear the skepticism in Sarah's voice, but to her credit, she didn't hang up. She listened patiently, asking questions, trying to make sense of it all. When John finished, there was a long silence. John, Sarah finally said, her voice cautious, I know you believe this, but it sounds far-fetched. Are you sure you're not just stressed out about something? John understood her skepticism. He would have felt the same way if the roles were reversed, but he knew what he had seen. He knew what the typewriter had typed. Sarah, he pleaded, I know it sounds crazy, but I'm not making this up. I need your help. We need to warn people. Sarah agreed to meet John the next day. She didn't promise to believe him, but she promised to listen. They met at a small diner on the edge of town. John brought the typewriter with him, hoping to show Sarah the message. He set it on the table between them, its metallic surface reflecting the dim light of the diner. Sarah looked at it with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. John recounted the events of the previous day, his voice shaky with anxiety. He showed Sarah the message, the words stark and ominous on the aged paper. Sarah examined it carefully, her brow furrowed in thought. She ran her fingers over the keys of the typewriter as if trying to unlock its secrets. I don't understand, she said, her voice barely a whisper. How is this even possible? John didn't have an answer. He didn't understand it himself, but he knew it was real. He could feel it in his gut. Sarah, ever the journalist, started asking practical questions. What kind of flood? Where exactly in the town square? How much warning time do we have? John tried to answer her questions, but the truth was he didn't know. The message was vague, cryptic. They spent the next few hours brainstorming, trying to figure out how to warn people without sounding crazy. They considered going to the authorities, but they knew they would be dismissed. They talked about writing an anonymous article for the newspaper, but they feared it wouldn't be taken seriously. They were stuck in a paradox, caught between the need to warn people and the fear of being labeled as lunatics. Section 5. A Race Against Time. Days turned into nights. The clock was ticking. The date of the predicted flood loomed closer. John felt a growing sense of urgency, a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. He couldn't shake off the image of the town square, submerged in water, chaos and panic reigning. He had to do something. He had to act. But what? He tried to focus on the message, searching for clues. Flood, May 20th, town square, be warned. It was frustratingly vague. What kind of flood? How bad would it be? How many people were in danger? The lack of information was agonizing. He felt like a character in a nightmare, trapped in a situation he couldn't control. John and Sarah decided to start small. They couldn't convince the authorities, but maybe they could warn individual people. They started with their friends and families, sharing the message, urging them to be cautious on May 20th. They met with mixed reactions. Some were worried, others were skeptical. A few even laughed it off. John understood their reactions. It was a hard story to swallow. Despite the skepticism, John and Sarah persisted. They printed out flyers warning of the impending flood. They distributed them in the town square, hoping to reach as many people as possible. They knew it was a long shot, but they had to try. They had to do something to avert the disaster, to save lives. The weight of responsibility was heavy on their shoulders. Section 6. Seeds of Doubt. As the days passed, the initial fear started to give way to doubt. The weather was calm, the skies clear, there was no sign of any impending flood. People began to question John and Sarah's warnings. Some accused them of spreading panic, others dismissed them as attention seekers. The doubt started to creep into John's mind as well. He found himself staring at the typewriter, questioning everything. Had he misinterpreted the message? Was it all just a figment of his imagination? He longed for a sign, a confirmation that he wasn't going crazy. But the typewriter remained silent, its keys cold and unresponsive. He felt a growing sense of despair, a feeling that he was fighting a losing battle. Despite the mounting doubt, Sarah remained supportive. She encouraged John to stay strong, to trust his instincts. She reminded him that even if they couldn't prevent the flood entirely, they could still save lives by warning people. Her words gave John a much-needed boost of confidence, a flicker of hope in the gathering darkness. Together, they decided to make one last effort. They contacted the local radio station, hoping to get their message out to a wider audience. They knew it was a risky move, but they were running out of options. They had to take a chance. They had to make their voices heard. Section 7. A Desperate Plea. The radio station agreed to give John and Sarah a small slot on their evening show. It wasn't much, but it was a chance to reach a wider audience. John sat in the studio, the microphone cold and intimidating in front of him. His heart pounded in his chest, his palms slick with sweat. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. The host introduced John and Sarah, their story already generating buzz among the listeners. John took a deep breath and began to speak. He told his story, his voice trembling at times, his words laced with urgency. He described the flea market, the mysterious typewriter, the ominous message. He pleaded with the listeners to take his warnings seriously, to be prepared for the possibility of a flood. Sarah followed, her voice calm and reassuring. She presented the facts, the date, the location. She emphasized the need for caution, for preparedness. She urged the listeners to spread the word, to warn their families and friends. Their message, delivered with a mix of fear and hope, resonated with some of the listeners. Calls started pouring in, some expressing concern, others voicing skepticism. John and Sarah answered as many as they could, trying to address their concerns, to reassure them that they weren't trying to cause panic, but to prevent a tragedy. They knew that their message wouldn't reach everyone, but they hoped it would be enough to make a difference. May 20th dawned, the day of the predicted flood. The sky was overcast, a stark contrast to the clear skies of the previous days. A cold wind whipped through the town, carrying a scent of rain. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension hanging over the town square. People gathered, some out of curiosity, others out of concern. John stood in the square, his eyes scanning the faces around him. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of fear and determination. He had done everything he could. He had warned the authorities, alerted the media, distributed flyers. Now all he could do was wait and watch. Sarah stood beside him, her hand resting on his arm, her presence a source of comfort. As the hours passed, the sky grew darker. The wind picked up, howling through the streets. Rain started to fall, light at first, then steadily increasing in intensity. The town square, once bustling with activity, was now deserted, the few remaining people seeking shelter from the approaching storm. John felt a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. He looked at the typewriter, which he had brought with him, its metallic surface gleaming under the streetlights. He wished it could tell him more, give him some indication of what was to come, but the typewriter remained silent, its secrets locked within its metallic frame. He was alone, facing the unknown, the future unfolding before him. The storm raged through the night, the wind howling like a banshee, the rain lashing down with relentless fury. John and Sarah took shelter in a small cafe near the town square, watching the storm unfold through the rain-streaked windows. They couldn't see much, but they could hear the roar of the wind, the relentless pounding of the rain. As the night wore on, the storm started to subside. The wind died down, the rain eased to a drizzle. Dawn broke, revealing a town transformed. The streets were flooded, the water reaching knee-deep in some areas. The town square was submerged, the water swirling around the base of the clock tower. It was a scene of chaos, but not the devastation John had feared. The flood, while significant, was not the catastrophic deluge predicted by the typewriter. It was a flood, yes, but a manageable one. The town's drainage system, recently upgraded, had managed to handle the excess water. The warnings issued by John and Sarah had also played a role, prompting people to take precautions, to move their belongings to higher ground. John stood in the flooded square, the water swirling around his ankles, a sense of relief washing over him. They had done it. They had averted a disaster. The typewriter's prediction, while not entirely accurate, had served its purpose. It had prompted action. It had saved lives. He looked at the typewriter, its metallic surface reflecting the pale morning light, a sense of gratitude welling up inside him. The days following the flood were a blur of activity. The town rallied together, cleaning up the debris, repairing the damage. John and Sarah found themselves hailed as heroes, their stories spreading throughout the town and beyond. People who had once dismissed them as crackpots now approached them with gratitude, thanking them for their courage, for their willingness to speak out. But amidst the accolades, John felt a growing unease. The experience had changed him. He had looked into the future, had seen the potential for disaster. He had tasted the bitter fruit of prescience, the burden of knowing what might come to pass. It was a weight he wasn't sure he could carry. He found himself constantly looking for signs, for hints of future events. He started to see patterns where none existed, to interpret every coincidence as a portent of things to come. He was trapped in a cycle of anticipation, a constant state of vigilance, waiting for the next message from the typewriter. He tried to ignore it, to convince himself that it was just a one-time event, a fluke of fate. But deep down, he knew it wasn't over. The typewriter, he realized, was more than just a machine. It was a conduit, a link to a realm beyond his comprehension, and he was its keeper, its unwilling oracle. Life went on, but it was a different kind of life. John couldn't shake off the feeling that he was living on borrowed time, that the future was constantly watching him, waiting to reveal its secrets. He kept the typewriter close, its presence a constant reminder of the power it held, the responsibility it thrust upon him. He continued to receive messages, cryptic warnings of events to come. Some were minor, easily averted. Others were more significant, requiring careful planning and decisive action. He learned to interpret the messages, to decipher their hidden meanings. He became a guardian, a protector, using his knowledge of the future to safeguard his town, his loved ones. The typewriter, once a source of fear, became a tool, a weapon against the unknown. It was a double-edged sword, a burden and a blessing. It gave him a glimpse into the future, but it also robbed him of the blissful ignorance of the present. He was a man caught between two worlds, the present and the future, his life forever altered by the echoes of what was yet to come.